$4,800 a year, and you probably don't even know it. No, it's not taxes, and it's not a sneaky vendor fee. It's a loophole buried deep in your lease, a loophole most California landlords copy-paste right into their agreement, handing their tenants a legal weapon to slash their rent by a full month, no court required. In the next 10 minutes, I'll show you the exact clause rewrite that closes this financial drain. Let's talk numbers. The average rent in California is around $2,400 a month. If a tenant successfully uses the repair and deduct remedy against you just twice a year, that's $4,800 straight out of your pocket. This isn't theoretical. This is money you're legally obligated to forego, simply because your lease doesn't properly address California Civil Code Section 1942. You're bleeding cash, not because you're a bad landlord, but because your paperwork is a liability. You might think, my tenants wouldn't do that, but wait, there's a catch. It's not about trust, it's about protection. Your lease should protect you from the worst-case scenario, not just the average one. This isn't about malicious tenants, it's about tenants who know their rights better than you know your own lease. So what exactly is this right that's costing you thousands? California Civil Code Section 1942 grants tenants the right to repair dilapidations, essentially habitability defects, and deduct the cost from their rent. This isn't an optional perk, it's state law. But here's the critical detail. This right is only triggered after you, the landlord, have failed to make repairs within a reasonable time after receiving notice from the tenant. The catch? Reasonable time is often left undefined, open to interpretation, and ripe for tenant exploitation if your lease is silent. The law also caps this deduction. A tenant can only deduct up to 1 month's rent, and they can only do it twice in any 12-month period. This isn't a blank check for tenants, but without a specific clause in your lease, you're letting them define reasonable time and effectively decide when they get a free month of rent. Most landlords think they just need to respond to maintenance requests. You need to do more than respond. You need to legally control the timeline. Your standard boilerplate lease, the one you likely downloaded or adapted, is probably riddled with these 5 mistakes that empower tenants to use the repair and deduct remedy against you. First, it fails to define habitability defect specifically. Second, it doesn't require written notice from the tenant allowing "I told you last month" claims. Third, it doesn't specify how notice must be given: a phone call, a text, a carrier pigeon. Fourth, and most critically, it fails to define reasonable time for repairs, leaving it open to interpretation by a tenant or a judge. Fifth, it lacks a specific notice and cure provision that outlines the precise steps both parties must take before any deduction can occur. These omissions are not minor oversights, they are gaping holes in your financial defense. Think about it. If your lease doesn't say otherwise, a tenant can claim they told you verbally about a leaky faucet, waited a week, fixed it themselves, and now they're deducting $300 from rent. Without a paper trail and a clear timeline, you're toast. This is where you stop losing money. Here is the exact language you need to add to your lease, ideally as a new maintenance and repairs or tenant repair and deduct section. Copy this directly. Tenant's obligations regarding repairs and deductions. Tenant acknowledges and understands the provisions of California Civil Code Section 1942 regarding the right to repair and deduct. To exercise this right, tenant must first provide landlord with written notice of the alleged dilapidation or defect. Such written notice shall be sent exclusively via text message to your designated phone number or via email to your designated email address. Voicemails, verbal communications, or notices sent to any other contact method are not valid forms of notice under this lease. Upon receipt of valid written notice from tenant, landlord shall have a reasonable time to commence and complete the necessary repairs. For urgent habitability defects posing an immediate threat to health or safety, e.g., lack of heat in winter, no hot water, raw sewage backup, a reasonable time is defined as 48 hours from landlord's receipt of valid written notice. For non-urgent habitability defects that do not pose an immediate threat, a reasonable time is defined as 30 calendar days from landlord's receipt of valid written notice. Tenant agrees that any attempted repair and deduction without strictly adhering to these notice requirements and allowing landlord the defined reasonable time to cure shall constitute a material breach of this lease and a failure to pay rent, making tenant liable for all associated costs including eviction proceedings and attorney's fees. Tenant further agrees that the maximum amount deductible for any single incident shall not exceed 1 month's rent, and such right may not be exercised more than twice in any 12-month period. as per California Civil Code Section 1942. Landlord reserves the right to inspect the premises prior to and after any alleged repair by tenant. This clause does three things. It defines notice, defines reasonable time, and puts the burden of proof squarely on the tenant if they deviate. A killer clause is useless without a killer protocol. Your job doesn't end with the lease update. You need a documented 48-hour response protocol. When you receive that text or email for an urgent repair, immediately respond in writing to acknowledge receipt. Received your text regarding the water heater. We are dispatching a technician within 24 hours. We'll update you with an ETA. This creates your paper trail. If you can't fix it within 48 hours, communicate why and when you will fix it. Technician on site, part ordered, expected delivery in 3 days. Repair scheduled for Friday. This documentation proves you acted within the reasonable time defined in your lease. If the tenant then attempts a repair and deduct, your documented communication chain legally neutralizes their claim. You fulfilled your contractual obligation. They did not. This isn't just good practice. It's your shield in small claims court. The judge will see that you were notified, you responded, and you initiated action within the agreed-upon timeframe. The tenant's claim of unreasonable delay evaporates. California tenants can legally deduct up to 1 month's rent for repairs without a court order if your lease lacks a compliant notice and cure clause. The average California rent of $2,400 per month means 2 such incidents per year equals $4,800 in unrecoverable losses. The repair and deduct right under CC Section 1942 is only triggered after a reasonable time to repair, and you can contractually define reasonable time as 48 hours for emergency defects and 30 days for non-urgent ones, giving yourself a documented safe harbor. A properly worded written notice requirement in your lease, specifying tenant must notify via dated text or email to a single designated number before any repair action, creates the paper trail that defeats most repair and deduct claims in small claims court. Updating this clause costs you nothing and takes 20 minutes. You cannot retroactively add it mid-tenancy, so every new lease or renewal is your only window. Missing it resets your exposure for another 12 months. Powered by LeaseBase Intelligence.